Setup here. Welcome to another live cast here on the Game Wisdom channel. As always, I am Josh Placer, and we got another great cast for you today. We're returning to the topic of free-to-play design, and more specifically discussing what does it mean to make an ethical free-to-play game. Something that allows for microtransactions and DLC without, of course, angering a lot of people and causing who knows how many hate videos to go up on YouTube by people. And joining me tonight to discuss this is returning guest and fan of the site, Game Economist Ramin Shokrizade.
Hello, Josh. How are you doing?
I am doing well. How are you?
You can see I'm not in the snow anymore. I moved from Michigan back to Austin.
Nice. I know when we last spoke, I think you got a new job. Is that right?
No, I just work remotely for two dogs in Toronto, so I can live wherever I want, and I'm back in Austin.
Nice. It is miserable right now where I'm at. It's raining, it's all crap, and Ramin's just like casually sitting outside. It looks pretty nice there.
I'm actually gloating at this moment.
Great. Hey, Mike, thanks for coming on. But we certainly have a lot to talk about. I was just telling Ramin before we started that my first book came out, and I'm hoping to see how things go with it. I'm working on a second one now, looking at kind of like the history of jumping and platforming in the game industry. And hopefully I'll have that one done in the next few months.
Sounds interesting.
It gets either I have like nothing to do or I'm just swamped with projects I'm trying to get done. So we'll see how things go over the next few months, at least on that front. But there's certainly a lot to talk about today. For people who are new watching us for the first time, Ramin has studied and has discussed at length about free-to-play and monetization over the past... you've been doing this now for over a decade, right? Even more than that, right?
I would say I started writing on the subject of free-to-play and virtual goods sales in the Los Angeles Times in 2000. So this is now, it's been 18 and a half years now.
And in that time, Ramin has worked and has done consulting work for many companies. Of course, a lot of that stuff is NDA, so I know you can't go too specifically about that. But you have, of course, written many pieces on Gamma Sutra as well about the impact on free-to-play and microtransactions, as well as what addiction stuff can mean when we talk about things from a psychological point of view. I know we had a cast about that. I think that was our second to last one. But when it comes to talking about ethical free-to-play design, this is, of course, a very tricky topic because there are so many examples of it not being so well. And just to recap for everyone watching, when we first talked, we brought up the topic about loot box design. And I think we both kind of agree that loot boxes are still, and even in like their basic implementation, is a form of gambling. And
yes.
Yeah, I just want everyone to make sure that who are watching us new for the first time, because you still have people who will try and argue against that. But with that said, though, since we last spoke, we've seen, of course, more examples of games using free-to-play, monetization elements, and, of course, what happened a few weeks ago with the whole Diablo, I'm not sure what we call it, controversy, a little hubbub, and all that. And I kind of showed Ramin the information about what was going on. And from your perspective, looking at free-to-play design and such, what did you make of the whole Diablo Immortal catastrophe?
Well, I mean, I haven't seen the business model they're going to use for this product yet because I haven't announced it. But it sounds like it's a product using Blizzard IP it's going to be made in Asia for Asian users. It was, even though it was announced at Blizzard.con, that wasn't the target audience at all. So it was a little bit odd that they that they used that venue to announce it.
Yeah. And at this point, we still haven't heard anything more from a design standpoint about it, but everybody was making like 15 different videos about Diablo Immortal and Blizzard the last few weeks there. So it was a bit of an interesting time, which I think has kind of settled down. But free-to-play design is still always big. And as we were just talking about before we started the stream, in order to talk about what is considered ethical design, we also kind of have to talk about what isn't ethical design. And I've played my fair share of free-to-play games. I know you, I mean, you've certainly played and studied a lot of them on your end as well. So, I guess the first question then to kick things off, when you think about unethical or hazardous monetization or free-to-play practices for the consumer, what comes to your mind?
Well, the key difference between interactive media and all other forms of media that have come before is that it's interactive.
Mm-hmm.
And being interactive, that means that not only can we manipulate you emotionally while you're playing one of our products, we can manipulate you physiologically and put you into an altered state of consciousness. And most importantly, we can shake you down for money while you're in this altered state of consciousness where you may not be making a clear purchase decision. And these are things you can't do if you're going to a movie. We don't shake you down for money in the middle of the movie when you're at a theater. If theaters could, they absolutely would.
Yeah.
I wrote a paper called The Titanic Effect, talking about this, how if we could, at the end of the Titanic where everybody's crying because our hero is freezing to death in the water after being such a good guy, if a pop-up could pop up and saying, for a certain amount of money you can change this ending, and then switch, and then suddenly he gets saved because enough people popped up some money to have Leonardo DiCaprio fished out of the water, then they would do that. And I mean, and you laugh because it sounds completely absurd, but there are at least two of the biggest mobile games out today, probably the biggest, that are aimed at young women. I'm trying not to name names, but I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. Are use exactly this model where they send you through a story, and you get attached to the characters, and then they'll do something horrible to the characters, and for some premium currency, you can avert disaster and save your now attached character that's in the story. Otherwise, they're a goner, or worse, some other catastrophe befalls them, and the story has a bad ending because you didn't cop up enough money. So I joked about it. I mean, I said it kind of tongue in cheek when I wrote Titanic Effect, but that's exactly what ended up happening on mobile in this case and a couple of these products.
Yeah, Ben, I remember like the first example of this when we were talking about stuff like Ebony and a lot of the, "Come save us, my lord" advertisements we used to get heavily on many video game sites when they're trying to push the sex angle. And now it's more, as you said, of save the child, or do you want to let this person die? You better cough up $2.99. And I know there's a Harry Potter game that came out, I think it was either late 2017 or early 2018, that got into some flack for that, where they have like one like their first big paywalls be like a child being like strangled by some kind of like monster, and you need to spend money now or this child is going to die, kind of thing.
Well, I mean that goes down back to Farmville, which was, to my knowledge, the first game I saw that did that, where it had in the first hour of play in Farmville, which many people that have contacted me from Zynga to tell me that this game wasn't aimed at children, even though it really looks like it's aimed at children. They swear it wasn't, but within the first hour, you were going to be exposed to a dying, wounded baby deer that is crying with big drops of tears popping out of its eyes as it looks up to you with these big eyes, slowly saying, "Please save me. I've been attacked by coyotes, and for $5 you can save me and I won't die. Otherwise I'm going to die any moment here. Please save me."
You can hear the violin playing in the background.
Yes, and I think I even showed this to international regulators in the Panama Summit in 2013 as an example of some of the other things that we would end up seeing. But this is basically an early application of the Titanic Effect, where they're attempting to traumatize somebody, presumably somebody who would be vulnerable to that, and right away, to me, that would seem like a child. I think most adults would look at that and go, "Really?" So despite all the protestations that this wasn't aimed at children, I'm still a little skeptical. But that was clearly an example of that where you could change the ending of the story after being traumatized, being subjected to some sort of really ghastly scenario, but you could change it to a happy ending if you were willing to spend some money.
And another aspect that we talked about, I think this was the first time we had you on, was about the discussion about pay-to-win elements. And from that cast, we discussed how if the player is able to essentially like supersede skill or basically downplay it by spending X amount of money, then you are basically paying for an advantage. And we've seen many free-to-play games, and of course we got some big examples from the AAA industry this past year and last year on that same front of being able to essentially buy your way into power.
Did you say on that same front?
Yeah.
Oh, I get it. On the same front.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Maybe that's an inside joke.
But it definitely shows again how much you can try, or we see developers trying to push how far they can go with monetization practices along those lines. And I guess besides those two examples, are there any other big examples of unethical free-to-play design you want to discuss? And then we'll try and move things into the ethical side.
Well, I mean, you're looking at it from the side of the player when you say, "Oh, I pay to win, it's bad. People can beat me because they spent some money and they didn't earn it." I don't look at it that way. I'm looking at it on a neurological level to see what are the mechanisms that we use in our games to trigger physiological effects to force the player into a altered state of consciousness, from which we can then use techniques to make them very uncomfortable so that they will spend money where they normally wouldn't if they weren't in this altered state of consciousness that we just intentionally put them into. So I'm looking at this on a more scientific view, possibly even a more nefarious view, because I'm quite open about the more I don't know, future techniques we're using to manipulate users into spending. They may not even be conscious that this is going on, but it is. So I would say one of the ways we put a player into altered state of consciousness is by activating their sympathetic nervous system, by triggering their fight or flight. Basically, we try to get their adrenaline levels up by threatening them in a game. This can be done by, from something as little as saying, we're going to take away some of your money if you don't, we're going to take away some of your resources if you don't cop up some money. There's many games where, for instance, you may be hitting a cap, and because you're about to hit a cap, you're going to lose all the resources that you could have gotten if you didn't hit that cap. So for low money, we'll raise the cap for you. This is a very common mechanic, but it's just one of many examples where you can threaten the resources or actually have a person's base be under attack. So if you try, forbid that we actually try to get some sleep while we play these games. You try to log off and get some sleep. Oh, whoa, it's you. Look how many times your base was attacked while it was defenseless. And you were fine. And you lost like a month's worth of work, which must really hurt. But of course, for a nominal fee, you could get a shield. And the next time, sleep in peace. Maybe even sleep without waking up in it with nightmares thinking that you're being raided while you're sleeping.
And I think the one game I played of that was Marvel Puzzle Quest. This was like 3-4 years ago.
I'm committed to not mentioning any names from me during this podcast, because I'm basically going to incriminate 95% of the industry in this podcast, and you know this. So
yeah, I'll take the blunt there.
Everyone is guilty.
Yeah. Hey, Olden, thanks for coming on. Now, regarding like putting players into that fight or flight perspective or that psychological condition, is that similar to the situation we see in like competitive first-person shooters, where we were talking about this, I think, last time when I think it was Activision that got a patent to say that they could alter the matchmaking to, let's say, put someone who is a lower level into a higher level match, and then they run that case where, oh, you think you're so good, but you're only using the level 3 guns, and these guys are using level 10. But, for a few more dollars, maybe you can roll a higher gun, or maybe you can just buy one outright, and now you can play with the big boys.
Well, I detected that matchmaking anomaly when I did a review of Hearthstone. Not supposed to mention any names, but I'm just saying that you're bringing it up first by talking about the Activision patent. But I saw an anomaly in the matchmaking where I was like, wow, I'm a brand new player. Why am I going up against a person that has all these legendaries and is like way higher level than me? That seems like a real error in the matchmaker. I mean, it's almost like they went. It was like broken intentionally to grab the highest level person possible to post with this against the lowest level player possible to spank me. I thought it was a little amusing that I tricked the guy and fired a power blast or something at the last minute and took him out and still won. But I'm not supposed to win that. Instead, I was supposed to, according to the patent, I was supposed to say, "Wow, look at all these cool cards that I don't have. How much do I have to spend in order to get these cards?
Yeah.
Let me do that so that I can be a big guy too." This was to the Activision people. This was like such a revolutionary idea to them that they thought they needed to run down to the patent office and file a patent for it. To most of us, looked at it and went, "Wow, that's not only like really unethical and bad design, but it's a little bit shocking that they would want to take credit for that."
Yeah.
Publicly by filing a patent for it, like everyone else is going to run out and try to do the same thing.
Yeah. And I know we're laughing about this, but like,
you got to laugh at some point. I
mean, it's laugh or cry.
The industry has gone so dark side that all you can do really is laugh, and also watch all the studios being closed, which I predicted last year in my data implosion paper, because consumers don't want this stuff. You can't force a consumer to buy stuff they don't want, even with all these nasty techniques I'm going to be going into today. You still, at some point, the consumer's going to say, "No, I'm going to go do something else that's like way more fun than what you're offering me."
And you've certainly been seeing that in the mobile front with excuse me, as we've seen with developers like the big names, they will survive. Your Rovios, your King, trying to think of a few other big ones off the top of my head. Niantic with Pokemon Go. Like these studios, like once they like break into like the popular mainstream like that, they get the clout and they get the recognition to stay around. But
I have inside information on how almost all these companies are going to be performing over the next year, so I really can't comment on that.
All right. But as we see, though, a lot of these smaller studios definitely have trouble, breaking even, let alone trying to earn anywhere near that money. And I know we've certainly talked about this before, about how when one studio kind of tries to break out or has that hit, everybody else tries to make a similar game or a quote-unquote clone of it. Again, I can't even count how many Clash of Clans clones there are. I know when I think this was like either our first or second cast, I was trying that South Park Phone Destroyer. I know there's
Love that name.
Yeah. It's very apropos, I think. There's like, who knows how many like Hearthstone or CCG related games. One game that I tried out, I don't think we talked about, but I was playing it over the last few months, was that new Command & Conquer game. I was trying it during the beta. And again, it had that same issue of matchmaking, where if I'm like 500 power, you're putting me up against someone with like 1200 power. But it even goes beyond that when you have rock, paper, scissors style combat saying, oh, this guy has a higher level rock unit and all your units are scissors. Well, enjoy. Like, how am I supposed to win there?
Spending money or quitting, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I guess trying to take things more to the ethical side, I guess here's our first big challenge then.
I didn't list all the unethical.
Oh, okay. go ahead, and I'll throw it over to you. There's probably so many more.
Yeah, well, there's a few big ones. I'm just doing categories. I'm not talking about individual games here. Okay, so we got the adrenaline with the threat generation. And I talked about the Titanic effect. Another one, which is even more insidious, is where they will combine the threat generation with oxytocin in order to create what I call the Dunkirk Effect, which is where you you try to make sure the player is pretty much forced into a group, or at least something that might be kind of look like a group, even though they don't really talk to each other in most cases. So they feel like they're on a team. These people are my people. I should be looking out for my people. Blah blah blah. And as we talked about in our last podcast, this is important because how oxytocin affects your thought processes is determined by whether you see the people around you as being part of your tribe or non-tribe, which is what I call xeno. If they're seen as part of your tribe, then you become protective of them. If they're seen as xeno, then you become aggressive towards them when oxytocin is released. Now, so in this case, the idea is you get them into a group, and then instead of threatening the player directly, which they also do, but more importantly and more effectively, they threaten your teammates. They threaten your tribe. Now you have a cocktail of both adrenaline and oxytocin kicking in, telling you that you need to protect your teammates. And biologically, you don't have a choice about this. Biologically, you are being intensely compelled to take action to defend your tribe. And this is one of those situations where even a mature, savvy, mentally stable adult will succumb and will start spending money to protect their tribe, because we're backdoor wired this way for 300,000 years to respond to threats in this fashion. So it's I don't know how well the studios using this technique understand what they're doing works. They just know it works through this massive amount of iteration you talked about just a bit ago, where people keep making the same games and you're repeating what's working, even if they don't understand why it's working. This is why it's working, and it's very powerful. But it's again, I think let's just talk about what makes all these examples we've just gone over unethical. What makes them unethical is that instead of you saying, going to a store and saying, here's a product on the shelf, do you want to buy it? Yes. Here's how much it costs. Buy it. I talked about how randomized prices, like in a loot box, where you don't know how much you have to spend to actually buy the product you're trying to buy, how this is not only gambling but also unethical. In my paper about how the ESRB was promoting gambling, I talked about how you could go into a grocery store, send your kid to a grocery store, and they try to buy a loaf of bread, but they have to spin a wheel to buy the loaf of bread, and so you don't know actually how much the loaf of bread will cost, because you don't know how many times you'll have to buy spins to get to the actual loaf of bread. This would be really unethical if you had to try to send a kid to the store and make them spin a wheel to buy a loaf of bread. It's unethical for adults too, but we tend to think that it's buyer beware with adults, even though these techniques are becoming powerful enough that everybody should be aware. But with children especially, they're just not, we don't consider them ready to be able to deal with these types of mental conundrums. So pretty much any of the techniques I just talked about are doubly unethical when minors are involved.
And regarding your point about buyer beware, this is I know, like on Gamma Sutra and a lot of the forums where there's discussions about free to play and pay to win, that is the common defense I see people bring up when they're supportive of loot box and this kind of free to play design, saying, why are you succumbing to this? If you were smart, you wouldn't spend $100 on a loot box. This is only meant to, I think they call it's like an idiot trap. Only the fools would spend this amount of money, so it's okay otherwise, because, us intelligent people will never fall for it.
Yes, well, the flaw in that logic, which I talked about in my compassion and free to play paper, which actually I got grilled by quite a number of people. Like it's like 50 negative responses to that paper where people were adamantly saying that compassion has no place in business whatsoever. And of course, I strongly disagree. But maybe this goes back to, well, what is business if it's supposed to be predatory? But in this case, if you're bragging that you got to the end of your favorite mobile game to the 300th level and you or 300th wave and you never spent a penny, and you're bragging that you did that and some other person ended up spending money so that you wouldn't have to, then basically what you're saying, and if you're saying that that person was mentally weaker than you and that's why they succumbed and spent money, well, what if that was actually true? Think about it. What if there was a mentally disabled person or a mentally handicapped person who was not as willful or strong as you, and so they broke down and spent all this money so that you didn't? Well, that means that the able-bodied or able-minded people are able to enjoy all their entertainment for free on the backs of those people that they look down upon. That smacks of quite a number of other types of predatory social systems that we've been dealing with since the Civil War and far before that.
And as you said, like when you've spoken to regulators and people regarding these issues, that it looks, when we talk about these kinds of free-to-play tricks and such, and they're aimed at children, and again, aimed at people, again, like the people who are very susceptible to addictive personalities, there's no other way to put it. It's just a very, dark light or a very negative light on the game industry or just on gaming in general.
Yeah, well, I especially like you start talking about that unpublished EDAR report that I saw that said that more than 50% of whales are children. There's a reason why they'd never published that paper. I mean, that would be like biting the hand that feeds them, because the last thing the industry wants people knowing is just how many children are whales. But they're the most vulnerable people to these methodologies. So if they're going to be in the loop and they're going to have a chance to spend, they will, and they won't really know when to stop.
Yeah. Now, regarding like people reaching like an end game and like the high level, whether they're whales or just people who get to like the top tier, I have a question I was thinking about, Ramin, that we've been seeing more free-to-play and mobile games trying to become e-sport or competitive level games. I know they have like Clash of Clans tournaments. I'm sure with Command & Conquer they're trying to push stuff like that, and probably a few other ones as well. And another defense that I see about free-to-play design is that when you get to the higher echelons, we're talking, the top 10% or maybe the top 100 players in the world, at that level is when kind of they say like the strategy or the complexity of the game begins, because everybody has already kind of paid their dues to get to that point. And I know some people will equate to spending money, like playing a traditional sport, buying golf clubs, buying access to a golf course or anything like that. And I don't know if I agree with that. I want to get your thoughts on that kind of design or that kind of opinion, that when you get to like the top tier, even though people may still be spending money or have spent a lot of money, the unethical side fades away, as some of them say.
Well, I mean, basically, you're bringing us back to pay to win, which again is as uncomfortable as it is for the player. It's the biggest concern there isn't necessarily that it's unethical. It's that is that you're intentionally creating a toxic environment for your players, and it just ends up resulting in a very low quality product. But that's, even though that's the standard in games has become such low quality now that that's no surprise that consumers are rejecting them. But when you offer to advantage one player at the expense of all other players, think about it. If we had 100 players and one of them pays to advantage themselves at the expense of everyone else, well, everyone who didn't spend money is now at a disadvantage. So one person was able to spend and help one person and harm 99 players. So if another person responds and does that, well, that person is helping one person and hurting 99 players. And then the more spending that goes on, the more people get hurt and the more toxic the environment it becomes. And so in these early Asian games that I was studying when I was doing my work back in 2007, 2008, I was seeing that these servers would go until what I described in one of my early papers, what I described as in how free-to-play works, very early paper. I talked about anti-games, ANTE. Basically, players keep anteing up until everyone else folds because they can't match the ante. And then these servers would become ghost towns because the winner would just scared everyone else off, and the server would be empty, and they'd be there in the server all by themselves saying, "I won."
Yeah.
Because I spent $10,000 and I'm VIP level 5, and no one else wants to play with me anymore. I don't understand why.
Yeah, and of course, the beauty from the design standpoint, as we've talked about, is that it becomes an endless money sink, because you can always add in some new weapon or some new power that then pushes the top tier a little bit higher and a little bit higher. And again, it just keeps going until either somebody does become king of the server, or everybody just gets tired of spending money and they quit.
But what if you were the king of the server and everyone else has given up, and so you're going to quit? So what if the developer then comes in and pretends to be a player and starts buying stuff to challenge you? Now you're going to start spending again, and you're not even competing against the player; you're just competing against the developer.
Yeah,
isn't it brilliant?
I know, and you can't really compete with somebody who can effectively just hit a
they
button
have
and
resources.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, because it's free for them. But
exactly.
You don't know that. Because you don't realize that you're not playing. You're competing against the developer.
And that brings up a very interesting question that I have. I was thinking about this with a lot of the competitive style mobile and free to play games. Do these games actually tell the player that they're actually fighting against another person, or they can just simulate it or have an AI play against them?
When I play these types of games, and I don't want to get into names of games I play, even though these are examples of good games that I enjoy playing. I tend to be at the upper echelons of these games because I play them pretty hardcore, and I'm pretty sure I can tell just how many bots are, but they try to make them look like normal players. But I'm playing against a lot of bots because otherwise, I would get to the top and then I'd have no one to compete against, and then I would, in theory, stop spending. So they have to have this artificial competition, which is bots. So there's going to be a ton of bots at the top. Which is, again, just like this hypothetical player I talked about, where the developer is trying to push the spender to spend more by challenging them.
Now, with regards to examples of unethical free-to-play design, are there any other categories you want to mention, Ramin, or do you think you've covered them all?
I think those are the main ones. I mean, I don't want to get into the more fringe ones that I talked about in my threat generation paper, like off-gendering. But there's that too. Off-gendering is when you force a person to play a gender other than the gender they see themselves as, to put them under stress, and then you offer to sell them the correct correct gender avatar for $5 or $10. This is very popular with games aimed at female children. That they'll make you pay. The male avatars are free, but the women avatars you have to pay for. Any sort of game where the last category which I want to mention is if they're trying to give you a dopamine drip through constant stimulation or near constant stimulation, and then they cut off the dopamine drip and put you in a dopamine deficit or dopamine withdrawal situation, and then say, okay, how do you feel now? And oh, you feel a little uncomfortable? Well, for a little money, I'll put you back on the drip. This is common with games that are just focusing completely on repetitive dopamine stimulation. And the term, you know where this comes from, was coined a while back as being fun pain.
Mm-hmm.
Fun pain is the simple term for a dopamine feed withdrawal sequence where you get the person strung out and make them spend to get out of this uncomfortable situation that you've placed them in, that they weren't in before they start playing your game. Mm-hmm. This is fun pain. Welcome to fun pain.
I know.
Are we having fun yet? So this is another way where you're creating an altered state of consciousness by modifying the physiology of the player, and then while they're strung out, you're trying to unstring them out. And, if we could do this with, street drugs, where it's interactive, where you could actually watch the person doing the drugs they just bought, and then kind of like taunt them to see if they'd want to get more or something like this. You could in theory sell a lot more product, and that's what's so powerful about interactive media. And companies boasting that there's no laws governing this type of behavior are not doing us any favors, because that's just causing regulators to become extremely concerned, because these products are much more powerful than the passive media that has come before them. So they're going to invite much greater abuse than products that have come before them, and they're ultimately going to require much greater regulation than products that came before them. So sitting here and bragging about how there's no regulation and taunting the regulators is just going to create the type of reaction you're seeing in Europe right now, and also in China right now, where China is pretty much just locked out entire major games out of China, even ones made in China, while they try to figure out how to deal with this crisis. Mm-hmm. A public health crisis, really. Yeah. So Europe is looking at it the same way. Obviously, America has no, at least our government has no appetite for regulation right now. Mm-hmm. So it's a free for all here. But to be successful, the big boys need to be able to sell their product worldwide, not just here. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be a big problem for them. But they're still thinking like Americans, thinking that if it's okay here, it's okay in Europe, and it's okay in China. But that's just not true. They've been playing the stuff longer than we have, and they're more concerned about their public welfare than we are. So they react a little bit more rapidly to these types of threats.
Yep. And clarifying your point there, about fun pain, I remember this was either our last or the second to last conversation. We talked about how the games that, I know this was our discussion about video game addiction, and when games are fair about, like games that make you want to keep playing them because they respect your time. Again, games like Civilization, like many roguelikes, and many titles where you want to keep playing it because you're enjoying your time. And the game, as we've said over the last, how long have we been talking? Again, with these guys, it just seems like, we're already 40 minutes in. It feels like we just started there.
We haven't gotten to the ethical monetization.
Yeah, I know. But
well, imagine if it was just one more turn, but it was just one more turn for 10 cents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know.
10 more turns for $1.
Oh my god!
I've got like 3,000 hours of just on Civilization 6, and if you add up all the Civilization games, it's probably 30,000 hours or something like that. Not counting the Civ games I actually worked on myself. And imagine if I had to pay 10 cents per move, somebody would have made a lot of money off of me.
Yeah, and as we talked about, when it comes to these elements like fun pain, I think I use the example in an article that I wrote that it's akin to like the supervillain plot of the guy, poisoning a town, then at the same time offering the cure. And it's one of those situations, as you said, that there are companies who love this kind of stuff. They love talking about, we made our game a little bit more annoying, and now everybody's buying it, or buying this improvement. Or I still remember that favorite one from, it was Battlefield, I forget the name of it. It was that free-to-play Battlefield game that came out in the early thousands. And or mid thousands, I think, and they were like, nobody was buying our microtransactions. But then when we started selling power, all of a sudden we got a lot of money. We don't know how that happened, and like everyone just sitting there going, "Yeah, sure you do." And
But the
it.
gameplay quality went down for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Oh, hey, we have another mic in chat. Thanks for coming on. But yeah, but getting back to the point there, I think this is starting to be a good segue into talking about ethical free to play design. If we don't, we'll be here for another 2 hours. Your laptop will probably die on us before we get there. But when I won't go back to a point you mentioned earlier when we were talking about community or clan based ways of manipulating people to become invested in the group or invested in spending money. Because on our first cast, we talked about kind of the what we felt was the golden age of MMO design, the late '90s, early thousands, with games like Shattered Galaxy, what was it, Tale in the Desert, and those other titles that really brought community and clan-based play together and getting people invested that way. But without, or at least I think what we didn't feel was being very manipulative on that front. And
Well, Shattered Galaxy, which is as far as I know, it's the only game that I've contributed to over the last 19 years that has actually put me in the credits. But that game was, at least initially, subscription. So that way you could have an early example of large-scale esports, which was an incredible experience for everybody who was playing Shattered Galaxy back when it was around, because people still talk fondly of that game. You could have esports because there was no pay to win.
Yep. And like I said, from our first cast, that was the first real MMO experience that I played. I think that was the only time that I subscribed to like a game for I got I think like a 6 month to a 1 year subscription, and that was like the only time I ever did that because that was kind of like my first real MMO. And then after that, it's just been getting harder and harder to keep myself engaged in these games as we started to see more of those monetization elements and just more ways of trying to get you to keep playing kind of filtered in.
So we should talk about how to do it right.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I know you were talking about this when we were on our we were talking about DMing a few weeks ago, but there's definitely a lot of different aspects about this depending upon the design and what kind of monetization elements. So I'm going to throw over to you, Ramin. I guess where do you want to start in terms of talking about ethical free to play?
Well, I mean, let's talk about why consumers like free to play. What's the good about free to play? I mean, if consumers didn't like it, we wouldn't have it. They wouldn't participate. The advantage of free to play, which is why Nexon introduced it, at least they're largely credited with introducing it. I know that Jagex was also doing something similar with I think RuneScape Border, but this was all going down in 2001, and the idea was there were a lot of people that couldn't afford a subscription, especially in Asia back then. There's a lot more people in Asia now that could afford a subscription, but back then that was just too high a hurdle. So we're like, they wanted to lower the barrier to entry. So they said, well, what if we just made the game free? And they tried it, and initially, they weren't making that much money, but then they started throwing in these like really, again, the massively pay-to-win type of elements in the Maple story. I'm giving myself permission to mention Maple story because it is of a historical importance here, and it was back in 2001. And they were like, "Wow, these people are spending money on this. If we sell power, people buy it." And so they kept making more and more pay to win, and it got more and more extreme. And the money just started flying in, and they were making more money doing that than they were making off the subscriptions of their previous titles. So after that, they were all in on free to play, and there was no more subscriptions. But they're also all in on pay to win. So actually, I don't think the quality of any of the games that have been after Shattered Galaxy have been at the level of Shattered Galaxy, because the business model required a lowering of the quality of the game by adding these this toxicity. So really, the key thing that makes free to play valuable to the player is it allows them to try the game for free. It lowers the barrier to entry.
Yep.
And this is a great thing to be able to try something for free and see if you like it, especially considering there's a lot of games out there that are just low quality, and you wouldn't know that until you tried it. So that's the best thing about free to play right there, is that it's free.
Yeah. Or we should say, quote unquote, free for a lot of people.
Well, it's free, and it gets the player in the door, and it lets them check it out. And there might be times when you want to play with your friends, and you have money, and they don't, but you still want them to play with you. So then you could be the big spender, and maybe in some ways, if the game allows, you can gift across to them or do other things to help them out so that they can play with you, and the company still gets paid. So that's the good part. The bad part is when we start doing all these things where we're not making it clear what we're charging the player, or we're threatening the player to make them spend, or we're making them uncomfortable to make them spend. Basically, all these times where we come up with a laundry list of creative ways to abuse our players, to force them, what I call coercive monetization, to force them into spending when otherwise they wouldn't, because our product wasn't high enough quality to merit that. And the more we force them to spend, the lower the quality of our product is. So they're actually spending more and getting less. And anytime you have an industry where the whole business model globally is, let's lower the quality of our products and raise the prices. I talked about this in the data implosion last year, where I predicted this implosion. Which actually happened, even though so many people were telling me, no, it won't happen. If you, for any product, anywhere on earth, if you keep raising the prices and lowering the quality, at some point people will stop buying it. It's just plain and simple. We're competing against other industries that are trying to raise their product quality and try to get their prices competitive. And at some point, the games used to be a huge value. People get so much value for such a small price, so it just sucked a lot of people in. I mean, you could get a subscription for $10, $15 a month and play for hundreds of hours. I mean, what a deal! I mean, there was nothing like that. Well, those days are gone pretty much. We've raised the prices so high and lowered the quality so much, and now people are like, yeah, I just don't enjoy games anymore. I'm not really sure why, but I'm just not feeling it. So I'm going to go back to movies, even though movies have become more expensive. Or I'm going to maybe go out and actually try to date somebody, even though going on a date used to be way more expensive than firing up a computer game. Now people are going back to dating. Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, and as when we talked about on our first cast, that we've seen like how much that money sink can become. It's no longer about, in the AAA side, spending $50, $60 on a game. You have to buy the enhanced edition for additional $20. Then there's additional purchases on top of that. So $60 now becomes $100 or $120. I think from when we last spoke to where we're at now, there was a lot of discussions regarding Assassin's Creed Odyssey, regarding allowing you to essentially buy an experience booster. And I remember people were like trying to justify that by saying, oh, it makes the game that much better. But if it makes the game that much better, why is it included in it for free? Why do you have to tack on an additional $10 to $15 purchase? And it's the same thing with a lot of the mobile and free-to-play games, where the free doesn't really mean free, or you're not getting that value out of it. If you're spending, $100, $200 plus a month on additional resources, and again, that ever-growing money sink. I remember you told me on our first cast that they even have algorithms, or they set things up so that the cost continues to get subsequently higher depending on how much you spend. So something that will have cost you like $5 your first time could become $10, and then $15, or they were offering like $500 to $1,000 options to people who would play these games.
This reactive pricing, in my top secrets of free to play, which is like my most read paper ever. I talked about this, and I pointed out, a number of companies that I thought were using reactive pricing, and one of them sent their lawyers after me to say, no, we don't actually do this, and forced me to partially retract that. And I was actually surprised, because I thought that, wow, this company's actually admitting that they're behind their competitors in this area. I didn't think that's something they'd want me to actually say that they said, but I did, and sure enough, within a year or two, they quietly bought a company that on this other company's website bragged that they were now able to add reactive pricing to this company that had just bought them. So I'm like, well, okay, now they're back up to speed, but can I go back to the original paper I wrote now and put it back the way I had it the first time? I mean, because if you're not doing it, I mean, that's again, if you're gonna, as I keep saying, if you're gonna go dark side, go all out. There's no point not going all out, right? I mean, you've already made the decision to go dark side. Go all out, man.
Yeah.
Do it. Ride it into the ground while it lasts, and then your products are become illegal, and then what are you going to do?
Exactly.
What's your escape plan? What's your plan B? I'm talking to a lot of these companies right now, because they're actually looping back, and they're like, okay, yeah, you were right. Now what? And I'm like, this goes back to the Black and White Twilight Zone episode called The Glove Cleaner. This guy buys a love potion, and because he wants this beautiful woman to fall in love with him, but she won't give him the time of day. So he buys this potion for $50 from the apothecary, gives it to her, and it works like a charm. She marries him, they have 2 kids, but she just dotes over him constantly, and it's driving him crazy. He can't stand it anymore. He has to get out. So he goes to the apothecary and says, what do I do? I need to reverse this love potion. And he's like, oh, no problem. I have the glove cleaner right here. It reverses any of my other potions. But it's only like $50,000.
Yeah.
This is like in black and white, so this is like $50,000 was probably hundreds of $1,000s back then. And then the guy's like, you can see him zooming into the close up as the guy goes, no. But that's what we have here. It's the getting in is easy. Getting out, what do you do? We've already seen some very large, some of the most successful, if not the most successful, early free-to-play game companies, at least in the West, have imploded majestically already. Sometimes even after IPOing.
Yeah.
They didn't have a plan B. No plan B.
Yeah.
No plan B. And the shareholders, but they've just managed to magically IPO right before it all became public.
Yeah.
That was their plan B.
Yeah, exactly.
IPO and dump. Pump and dump is what we call that. So I mean, you might be seeing a lot of pump and dump coming up. Again, I'm actually don't know of anybody who's getting ready to pump and dump, but it's just that's probably some of what you're going to see coming up is pump and dump.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we going to do to make these games more ethical? We can have transparent, clear pricing. When you want to sell something, it should have a fixed and clear price. Person shouldn't have to gamble in order to figure out what a price is on something. Fair enough?
Yep. And actually, just to clarify that, so in your mind, would you see like loot boxes in like any sense have a form of being ethical, or do you think that ship has kind of sailed on that kind of design?
If you can buy a loot box for premium currency, it's unethical.
Okay.
If you're playing the original Diablo and you kill you defeat a demon and a bunch of loot flies out, that's basically a loot box.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, because you didn't have to pay for that. That's just part of gameplay. That's a normal reward systems in the game. Reward systems are great. Randomized rewards are fantastic. Players love randomized loot, but they shouldn't have to pay for it.
Yep, and I think somebody on one of my pieces I wrote, Kama Sutra, tried to bring that very same argument up as a proto loot box, saying, oh, you love Diablo when you're killing enemies and something random drops, so surely that's the same as a loot box.
There's nothing wrong with randomized loot.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with randomized pricing.
Mm-hmm.
If I go into a restaurant and I say, I want a burrito and some chips and a side of orange juice, I shouldn't have to like pull a slot machine or roll a loot box in order to find out how much my bill's going to be at the end. Wow, look, I only got it for $5 today. Oh, look, that other guy over there just got raked for $500, and I basically got my meal for free. Mm-hmm. I'm great. What a wonderful country. But that's not ethical, because the guy had to pay $500. He didn't get $500 worth of food out of it. Mm-mm. Even if I got a good deal, but I'm laughing at him because he paid for my meal. That's not ethical either on my part.
Mm-hmm. Mike in chat is asking, are school fates lucky dip gambling? Like they're kind of fundraiser things.
Our school fundraisers. They can do whatever they want. Like, they can set up gambling if they want to. But that might be a run afoul of gambling rules. But basically, if they're just running an entertainment event and trying to get people to contribute to the school, that's people know that they're just contributing. They're not getting something back. If there's a raffle or something, that's great, but that's not usually why somebody would contribute to a school. They're contributing to school because someone has to contribute to the school, and we're not funding education anymore like we used to. So I would say it could be if the prize was great enough to override the natural altruistic desire to give to the school. Like if they're giving away a car or something on a raffle, then you're getting into gambling issues. But I mean, it's so far away from it's the example you're giving there is like old school gambling. Old school gambling isn't nearly as powerful as interactive gambling, where the game is adjusting to you. So I'm much less concerned about old school gambling, even though we have all these rules to protect us from gambling. That's so archaic and primitive. I'm surprised that casinos are still in business, because what we can do interactively is so much more powerful than what these old analog casinos can do.
Speaking about interactive gambling, I mean, there's something that I remember. This was about, I want to say, 2-3 years ago, that I know in Atlantic City around here, they were trying to set up video game gambling machines. And there was like a few big articles like around here locally about they were going to try and get into major casinos, and it was going to be this next big thing. And then I heard nothing. Like it just disappeared like after 30 days. Like from your end, did you hear anything about that? Like did that ever come up again?
No, but I mean, I think I don't know about this, whatever you're referring to, but they've had gambling in England for a long time, just in public places where there's slot machines like in regular stores. And because of that, they actually have like a system set up to actually survey children and adults about their gambling habits so they can track them. And as of last year, the rate of children experiencing the symptoms of problematic gambling is actually higher than the rate that adults are having. So this has become a very serious public health and societal problem for England because their children had access to gambling and couldn't control themselves, and so they're having much greater problems with it than the adults are.
A question from another Mike in chat. He was asking, so is it okay to be able to buy a loot box / card booster with in-game money that you earn as well as with premium currency? And if the boosters have a fixed defined randomness of rare cards you can get, is that okay?
If the boosters are bought completely with in-game currency that you earn during gameplay, it's a gameplay mechanic. It's great, fantastic. Nothing unethical about it. As soon as you start to allow the player to pay for it with real money, then it becomes gambling. And some people are going to be more vulnerable to gambling than others. And I'm not worried about the person who has balls of steel that can go through and not buy anything. But I am worried about the people, and especially children, because they're biologically have a harder time doing this, that they don't have the willpower to say no. They don't understand the value of money. They don't understand the long-term repercussions of spending now for something that really isn't going to help them later. So that's what I'm concerned about. I would say that it's flat out unethical if you're spending real money on a gambling mechanic in a game, and especially so if it's going to be used for pay to win, and especially so if it's going to be used for kids with pay to win. But anyways, what's the difference between a little bit unethical and a lot unethical? It's just, a little pregnant or versus a lot pregnant. It's basically, is it ethical or not ethical? And so we could sit here and argue about what the degree of unethicalness is all day. The clear thing is that there's certain things you can do that are ethical, and there's certain things you can do that are unethical. Not being clear about the price by randomizing the price is unethical.
And Mojo in chat was talking about slot gambling machines that have video game representation. What I was talking about was there was actually like a video game you could pay money for, and depending upon your performance in 30 seconds would determine what the payout was. And the game would go through various levels, or would choose a level every time you quote unquote spin the wheel, in a manner of speaking. And this was again like 2 maybe 3 years ago. And there was a huge push, there was a lot of discussions, and then nobody ever talked about it ever again.
Well, I took a friend to Six Flags Fiesta earlier this year, and she's very athletic, and she managed to complete the rope bridge contest thing there, and got the biggest plushie toy in the park, and walked away with it after the first try. But that's because she's really good now. But if they had a way of like fudging it, like hitting a button and spinning you around and tossing you off, then that would be like totally unethical. And I've heard of many like circuses that do things like that, where they'll hit a button or do something to make it so you lose if you're getting a little too successful. But in an interactive media, it could be programmed to do that to you. You don't know if you're getting something that's random, or if it's been rigged to make you lose. And without any oversight, how are you going to even know? I mean, look, even in real space, we have VW cars that are rigged to be clean when they're tested, and then pollute as soon as they come off the testing machine. Once you have electronics involved, where they can remap, depending on the circumstances, then all kinds of unethical behavior is much harder to detect, because you can't really be sure if it's just chance or not.
Yep, and that going back to what we were talking about earlier with regards to how most general consumers of video games don't like this kind of stuff. It's when that thought gets put in their head that, am I losing because this guy was better than me? Or am I losing because they spent $15? Or their weapons are better, they have epic level gear than me? And once that thought gets in your head, even if the game didn't do that, if that's magical unicorn, that
Bingo.
It does work. Yep.
Even if they will assume that it was pay to win, even if it was a clean kill, a clean win, they'll just assume that their person cheated, if it's possible to cheat. Because no one wants to say I got beat fair and square. They're like, oh yeah, I just cheated. But that creates toxicity, where everybody's mad at everybody else, and instead of these being community and people you want to get to know and befriend and respect, you actually have less respect for these people as you play with them longer.
They couldn't have beat me fair and square. No, I'm really great at it. They must have spent money, or they must have the exclusive super gun that beats everybody.
They're just a scruffy wallet warrior.
Yeah. And a few more questions in chat. We have two mics on the same time. So Mike Garcia asks, why are mobile games different to console and PC games regarding in-app purchases?
Well, I mean, they tend to be more interactive than the console and PC games. But console got into free to play years after it was started up in Asia, mostly on PCs. Because mobile games are so much more popular in the East than they are in the West, you're seeing a lot more of these free-to-play things that started in the East going straight to mobile faster than they did in the West. But other than that, I mean, at this point, you can play pretty much anything that's on PC on a mobile. So there's no inherent difference. It's just more where these games are played. We're not real big on mobile games in the West. It's huge in the East. So you see, mobile games tend to be more Eastern centric as far as the culture of how they were made and how they're delivered, whereas like console games tend to be more popular in the West, where you actually play this at your house, whereas you go to an internet cafe in the East, which is where they usually play instead of at their homes. It's more social, and you're not using consoles. Consoles are something you do at home if you're affluent and you can afford your own console in your house. That's not the standard setup in the East.
I know in Japan in particular that mobile gaming, I think, is the biggest in Japan than is anywhere else in the world, or at least that was like a study I saw like a few years ago.
Yeah, no, the Japan market is distinctly different than the Korean and the Chinese market.
Okay. And another question from this time Mike Sevanovic, who I hope I didn't butcher your last name too much. He said, so do I understand that correctly that in-game currency only is okay for buying boosters, but with premium currency or both is not? And then, so what then can/should be bought with premium currency or real money?
Okay, so it's a very good question. You can first of all, whatever you buy, the price should be clear. Also, what's very effective is you can provide something, an accelerant like an XP booster or gold booster, that's long term, not like one use, but like what I might call a subscription or a micro subscription, where this allows you to go through the game maybe a little bit faster or progress through the game a little faster than someone who isn't using it. But these are metagame effects. These are boosts that only affect the metagame, meaning what happens between gameplay events. So if I have a boost to XP or gold, that doesn't mean I'm going to be able to blow up your spaceship faster in a battle, because the battle is presumably, unless we're using an Activision matchmaker, is actually a balanced matchmaker, and so then it's going to be a contest of skill, not a contest of money. So unless it's an Activision game. So in such a situation, it doesn't matter if I got more XP at the end, because it didn't affect the battle. It didn't affect my chances of winning or losing in that battle. It may mean that I'll advance faster, and in 10 more battles I'll be ahead of you and battling someone else other than you because you fell behind because you didn't have the subscription. But that's still fair and clean. It's not affecting your chances of winning or losing. It means ultimately you might run out of content faster than the people who didn't spend. So really, in the long run, you may not benefit from spending, but it's not hurting anyone, and the price is clear, and because it's not affecting the gameplay when you're in an altered state of consciousness, it's not like I put you in an altered state of consciousness and then force you to buy something that you wouldn't have if you hadn't been in that altered state of consciousness.
And I guess to follow up on that, I guess two questions from me. The first one, so with the booster example, do you see this as being like a one-time purchase, like as you said, like a premium buy, or would this be something that would need to be like maintained, like a $5 a month subscription, $10 or something like that?
Well, I tend to prefer, at least myself, I tend to prefer to keep charging them if they're going to keep playing. I mean, games as a service means it's a service, and you have to charge for services in order to be able to continue providing services. So if they're going to use the service, they should pay for the service.
And I guess, and then that kind of leads me to my second question. And going back to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, then, would you have a problem with that, with the experience booster in that game? But again, that's of course a full retail game offering that option.
No, I don't have a problem with that at all. But the thing is, if they advertise the game as having 100 hours of content, and then they offer to sell you an XP booster, what they're not telling you is that now, if it's 100% XP booster, now basically you've just turned 100 hours of content into 50 hours of content. So you've actually getting less content because you spent more money.
Yeah, I think for me,
that's the potential downside.
Okay. Yeah, I think for like myself, I'm not a fan of that, because I think this goes back to what we were saying a few minutes ago regarding that perception about the game balance. And I know a lot of people complain about with Assassin's Creed Odyssey that it felt like the game was not balanced without having that experience booster.
Well, balanced against what?
Balance
has two sides to it.
I guess balance in terms of the content that was there allowing the player to progress versus having to grind and do other stuff in order to keep moving along in the story. Like, if I know people complain saying that if I just wanted to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey for the story, that I would hit that point where, oh, I'm forced to do a lot of grinding, I'm forced to do a lot of additional tasks that I didn't want to do. Okay. Whereas the people who did get the experience booster felt that the story was just, it was perfectly tuned. Like, I beat a story quest, I can then immediately move on to the next, and the next.
All right, so what they did here is they implemented fun pain by making the game super grindy if you didn't buy the accelerant. So basically, the by itself in a vacuum, the accelerant isn't unethical.
Okay.
What might be unethical is the fun pain that they put into the game to actually make you feel bad while you're playing the game. So then you would have to buy something to feel to feel comfortable again.
Okay. So then going back to like a free-to-play or where it's more of a metagame thing, again, where it's fair is the fact that if I'm playing like matchmaking, for instance, I play 10 matches, that experience booster does not impact anything with regards to what I'm doing in those matches. Right. Where with something like with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it was a case where I do a level or I do a quest, and then it's like, oh, but you can't do this because you need to go do something else. And as you said, that's when they start implementing that fun pain aspect, that the accelerant is now being tied into kind of stopping you from enjoying the game.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know how much this game was, but let's say if it was $50. What they're not telling you is that you're buying a crippled version of the game for $50, and the full version of the game costs whatever that plus the accelerant. So maybe that's $80. So the real version is $80, but they sold you the crippled version for $50, but didn't tell you they sold you the crippled version. So again, they're not telling you the real price of the game, and that's unethical to just sell you something without telling you the real cost.
And Mike Garcia, he came in a little bit late. He wanted to know, what was your thoughts on Diablo Immortal, which we did say at the beginning, but for people who did come in late, if you wouldn't mind just clarifying that.
It's a game being developed, I believe, in China. It's they've already admitted just today on Gam Sutra, they think they mentioned that their defense is that game, they made that game because there was demand for it in Asia. So it really is a game made in Asia for Asian consumers, and then announced in the West at BlizzCon, which is kind of really bizarre, because it wasn't made for the people at BlizzCon, and the people at BlizzCon didn't like hearing it because it wasn't what they wanted at all. But it was never intended for them. Just announced to them, just to make them feel weird.
And it caused many YouTubers and journalists to go crazy for a week or so. And I did find that link on Gama Sutra. I posted in chat if anybody wants to see that piece that Ramin was just talking about.
Yep. And one of the Blizz developers, who I think had an Asian name, I don't know if that means the person's actually Asian or not, but he said his response was, "Don't you guys play mobile games?" I mean, he was really shocked. He was almost shaming them for being PC gamers, that like they should be playing more mobile games. Well, if this person is actually native Asian, then that makes sense from his culture. They should be playing more mobile games because that's what they do in Asia. But then that is a problem, because if he's talking to Westerners and he's trying to apply one culture to them that isn't their culture, he's going to make a lot of errors because they make assumptions about people that their behavior isn't like that. I try to make it clear when I'm talking about something what culture I'm referring to, because when I'm talking about demographics in the West, they're very different than they are in China, and they're very different than they are in Japan. It's totally different markets, and different from Eastern Europe or Western Europe. So you could be an expert in one of these markets, but make serious strategic errors in another market.
All right. Now, getting back to talking about ethical free-to-play design, now, as we've said before regarding randomized progression being a huge factor, depending upon whether it is free or being manipulated by the game. Now, I guess another game I want to bring up, I think I know what your answer is going to be, but the whole discussion about Shadows of War by EA and how the original version of that game was simply like it really pushed the loot box side. At the end, I think a few months ago, they completely redid the end game balance to remove that kind of loot box need. And this is another point. This is another big defense that I see people. I see Mike Savnoak is leaving a question. I'll get to that in a second. But this was another defense I see people have about loot boxes, that if it's a single player game, then what's the harm in having a loot box system or having these additional microtransactions on top of the base costs?
So you're asking me what's the harm in a slot machine because it's single player, and what's the harm in dropping $10,000 into a slot machine
if it's not hurting anybody else
because it's single player?
Yes.
The harm is that some people are biologically vulnerable to the dopamine loops in these types of things. They can't stop. And that's why we have problem gamblers. It's a real psychological and biological condition for them that can cause real harm for them. It may be a small percentage of the population, but it's the population that casinos really want in their casinos, and it's also the population that these types of game developers want in their games.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. And as we've said, it's not about the people, as you said, with balls of steel, the mentally fortitude who can play whatever to never be conditioned or never pay. It's about the people who are succumbed to it, exactly. But Mike's question has to do with more, his next set of questions have to do with premium currency itself. So the first point is it okay to have a premium currency? Or is it better to use real money for premium purchases like those EXP/gold boosts?
I think I addressed this in my Systems of Control and Free-to-Play paper, where I talk about the more layers of separation you have between the real dollar amount and what you're actually spending, the harder it is for the player to figure out how much they're actually spending. So even though I've done this in my designs, I've done this type of layering, I would say that it's mildly unethical, but again, unethical or ethical. It's unethical because you're making it harder for the player to see what they're actually spending. Anytime you make it difficult for them to know how much they're going to have to pay for something, that's unethical. So if I have to have a bachelor's in mathematics and a calculator in order to figure out how much that the meal is going to cost that I just ordered at a restaurant, then that's not ethical. It should be clearly displayed what the price is. And like that's not clearly displayed.
Yeah, and like we've seen that rabbit hole where it's like you need to buy, or it's 50 gold pieces, but 50 gold pieces can be bought with 27 rubies. But if you want 27 rubies, you need 67 sapphires, and then to get 67 sapphires, you need 300 copper. And how much money should that all cost?
Yeah, or you want to buy something that costs 500 premium currency, but the packages are sold in 400 and 1,000. So you buy two 400s, which basically cost the same amount as 1,000. So you just end up buying the 1,000 when all you really needed was 500.
Yeah.
But they forced you to buy 1,000 and pay basically double the price of what you wanted because you couldn't just buy the thing directly.
And then Mike's second question is, should in-game money never be bought with real money or premium currency, instead only be gained through playing it or playing the game?
That would be far more ethical.
All right.
And in my games, I don't have a premium currency. In the games in some of the games in the past, I've had premium currencies that I didn't have a choice. I couldn't remove. But in all the designs I'm working on now, there are no premium currencies that are used for anything other than purchasing subscriptions.
Okay. And now that actually takes me to a question then for you. And again, this is another popular defense that we see when people talk about microtransactions and monetization in games, and that is having cosmetic or items that have no bearing on the gameplay. Of course, a very big example of this would be League of Legends, with all the champion skins, custom voice packs. I think Dota 2 has that as well. And these are elements that you can only get by spending real money. You cannot earn them through in-game play. But as what people say is, of course, the fact that they have no gameplay advantages. If I buy 10 premium skins, it's not going to make me a better player in League of Legends. So, from that standpoint, is that considered ethical or unethical?
That's ethical. You're buying some. You want your characters to look different, so you're paying for it. It's not harming anyone. It's not harming you that I know of, unless somebody's got a skin problem. I can't help myself. I keep buying skins. But I don't know if that's like really a dopamine loop kind of thing. That's just somebody's has a passionate hobby about something.
And I guess taking that one step further, if you restricted cosmetic items to loot box purchases, would that be taking things too far then? Or would it still be okay?
Again, they don't know the price of the whatever they're trying to buy, so that becomes less ethical because you're not telling them the real price of whatever they want.
Okay. So, I think actually, as a quick time check, we are about an hour and 20 in. So again, we could keep talking for I think a few more hours, but if we do start to get a little bit too late, if you start to get the warning light on your laptop, let me know, Ramin. But
I'm good for at least 15 minutes or so, but I don't know if we're kind of getting towards the end.
Yeah, maybe. That's what I'm thinking. So for people watching us right now live, if you have any questions regarding free-to-play design or monetizations, please get them in the next few minutes. This will kind of be our last call. I have a few more questions for you, Rami, and good. I'll turn things over to you if you have anything separate you want to add in. Okay. So, I guess getting at the heart of the matter then, in terms of free-to-play design and monetization then, you of course mentioned accelerants as something that would be considered ethical. But obviously without naming games or anything NDA breaking, what would be some other examples of monetization that you would consider to be fair to the player?
I sell prestige.
So,
I sell prestige.
And for people watching, what would that be considered? Like, what would be like a game design example? You'll have to name a direct example.
Well, I could give you a direct example from a game I designed, and that would be World of Warships.
Okay.
I charge you more to play a warship than if you're going to play a destroyer. I mean, if I'm going to charge you more for a battleship than for a destroyer. It may not be obvious right away, but I do. And but I know you'll pay that because you want to be a badass. And so you pay more to be a badass.
I think that defines so many monetization right there.
But it's ethical. Because it's do you want to if you want that extra attention, then you pay for it. Or if you're okay just running around with a destroyer, then you're going to be. I'm going to charge you a lot less, or maybe nothing at all, to run around in a destroyer. But we need destroyers because the battleships need to blow something up, right? So it all works out as long as the matchmaker is working effectively and I'm not pulling Activision. Then both sides are going to be equally balanced. If you may have a battleship on your side, but there's another battleship on the other side to make it up for it. It's completely clean. It's a fair fight. Everyone's going to be. It's skill based. Everyone's going to have a good time, and the outcome is not predictable.
Yeah, and as you say, big part of that is obviously the matchmaking. Because as you said, you could see things go the opposite way, where one team has 6 battleships, the other team has none, and then it's a case of, why do we even compete? We have no way of actually countering this, unless, of course, we spend the money for it.
Well, I mean, in any relationship, trust is fundamental to any relationship. And without trust, you're not going anywhere in any sort of relationship. So when a developer intentionally breaks that trust in order to cheat on their behalf and against your best interests, then I think that's a fundamental breach of trust. And if they're going to go ahead and patent it, that's something that history will record forever. I think that was a major mistake.
Let's see. Mike Garcia in chat's asking, what do you think of ads in mobile free-to-play games, especially for games aimed at children?
Recent article came out showing that 95% of games or apps aimed at 5 to 7 year olds had inappropriate advertisements or pop-ups solicitations in the game. 95%. This is something that is flat out illegal in Europe. It's endemic. It's exactly what I warned the regulators would happen in 2013 when I went to Panama to speak at the first International Regulatory Summit. And so I think we need to be especially careful with children. We shouldn't be we shouldn't be intentionally putting them through discomfort or putting them through threat generation systems, or especially because children are their physiology and even their genetics can be permanently modified by exposure to stress chemicals like cortisol. So you can actually permanently damage a child by exposing them to stress when they're young. So some of the things that we do to adults without really thinking about it, and as game developers, can actually cause permanent long-term damage and lower the lifespan of children. So we really should be much more careful with how we approach this with children, and someone's going to have to figure out a way to gate it so that some of these products aren't being played by children. In Korea, they gate it with a social security number, so they know how old you are when you log into these games. We don't do that here.
Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing a piece on Gama Sutra, I think it was like a few weeks ago, saying, I forget if it was in China or in Japan or Korea, that they were going to use like police databases to determine, who was playing video games or how long they were playing games for.
Well, I know in China they're trying to restrict how many hours you can play, and I think the same thing in Korea. So they know that just the duration alone is a problem, but it's not just a quantity issue; it's also a quality issue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you're engaged, when a child is playing football or some sort of sport, yes, there's more adrenaline going on, and that would normally put them at risk. But there's also a lot of chemicals that are being released that reduce their stress while they're exercising, like endorphins. Natural opiates are released during these times. It balances out. You may not get the proper mix of these chemicals when you're sitting in a chair because your body's not responding to exercise. So it could be a more hazardous situation than it would be if you were running around. Like when I talked about in my I'm Dying to Play paper, where I talked about 2 cases where players died or almost died while engaging in esports, and I went over the mechanisms of this. Well, in a normal game, you would get tired and stop at some point. Well, because of the cocktail of chemicals that are released when you're in esports, you can go a long time and not feel tired, and you don't know that your body's degrading because your natural opiates are flowing and you're just feeling numb to it.
Another question in chat from Malwinius asks, what about monetization in single-player games like Dragon Age 3, which was on one of the first to introduce that? I didn't play Dragon Age 3 myself, so I don't know what his example was.
That was the one with like the Inquisition and stuff. I know there were DLCs, a bunch of DLCs in Dragon Age 3. I'm not really sure what like a microtransaction he's talking about other than a DLC.
Yeah, if you can clarify that, Melwin, we'll give you a minute. We'll move on to Mike Savanovik's question. Besides EXP and gold boosters and cosmetics, what else can be ethically sold in a trading card / hero collector kind of game, or are these enough to sustain the game service?
I think generally your reward system should be part of the gameplay, and you should not use money to tamper with your reward systems. Otherwise, you'll undermine your reward systems. The player will actually enjoy them less if they have the chance to spend real money on it, because once they realize they've done that, the reward, the challenge level on the game has gone down so low that they've lost interest. So a lot of players will actually stop playing after they've paid to make the difficulty easier. So it actually hurts their gameplay. That lowers the quality of your game. getting the right balance so that your game stays challenging for different players of different skill levels is a real art.
Mm-hmm.
It can take you a decade or more as a game designer to figure out how to do that with even just one product, and then you're just coming in and Mickey Mousing with that. Oh, sorry, shouldn't mention any IPs. Messing around with that with because you're trying to make some money, then you can just throw the whole balance of that Diablo 3 that right out the window,
Mm-hmm.
and then people don't like your game anymore. Would have been a great game otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And then you're forced to spend like a year and a half trying to remove all that stuff, like the specific game did with a certain patch 1.04. Yeah. And I guess building off of Mike's question there, I guess returning to Hearthstone as kind of example, like as we said earlier, Hearthstone selling booster packs and the matchmaking is more on the unethical side of things. But with their kind of like premium quests, so when they sell expansions that give you more quests and more cards to earn, would that be considered ethical by the fact that you are spending a fixed price for a fixed set of values?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert, but when I evaluated Hearthstone in I think it was my threat generation paper, I mentioned that the sealed pack tournaments, where presumably everybody has the same chances of winning, and it's basically just your ability to use the resources you have most effectively. Those are completely like skill based, and that's really the best part of the game. But because they know that's the best part of the game, in order to actually that part isn't free to play. That part is pay per play. Every time you want to play one of those open pack tournaments, you have to pay for it. So that's the only unbroken part of Hearthstone, in my opinion, and it's not free to play. It's a completely straight up pay as you go game.
Okay.
So it's just the free-to-play part that's intentionally broken.
All right. And Mike Garcia asks, what do you think about data mining users, specifically children, in, I guess, free-to-play and mobile games?
Well, I think most countries, even in the U.S., agree that it's not legal. That's not ethical.
Okay.
We just are not really enforcing it because we don't have regulatories that are employed. Then we can't regulate even the laws we have. But in other countries, they do fund their regulatory agencies and they do regulate these things.
Okay.
As well, a lot of companies are starting to shut down their service in Europe because their game is made so fundamentally unethically that they can't comply with the new regulations in Europe. So there's just no point even trying to do so. So they just discontinue service there.
Mm-hmm. And that actually takes me to my final question, and then I'll turn it over to you, Rami. And again, for people watching, if you have any more questions, Okay, Malwinius got back. Okay, it's tied to the co-op part of the game, providing loot boxes, boosters, and gear for money. You could earn it in game, but with a lot of grinding.
So what's the question?
It was about what was your thoughts on that kind of monetization in a single-player game. I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Yeah,
sounds like a fun pain thing again.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're intentionally making a game of low quality to annoy the player after they bought it, and now they're so frustrated with their game. It's almost like there's some franchises that I really like, but they come out with a game that I'll spend a lot of money on because I'm a fan of that franchise, just to find out that the game is like horribly broken, and then they'll come out with a DLC that kind of basically fixes the breaks in the first game, but then they charged me another $30 for it. So really, again, I got snickered because the real cost of the game was that plus the cost of the expansion, because it wasn't really a good functional game without that. But if that was a free-to-play game, I would have known that right away instead of having to pay $50 or $60. So this is the thing you get for a consumer when you get you're sold a crippled retail product and then forced to buy a DLC. This is the worst of all worlds for the consumer, and this is why you've had such extreme consumer backlash to these sorts of products just in the last year.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes kind of like our main point for today is the fact that if the monetization is purposely tilting the game experience or the game mechanics against the player, then it is going to be viewed as being unethical, because it's not the case of developer, like, give you an example or just a hypothetical. It's not the same as if a developer discovers through playtesting that, let's say, one power or one ability is overpowered, and then we correct it. It's basically saying, we know this is broken or we know this is overpowered, but we're going to keep it in anyway to incentivize the player to spend that money.
Well, but it's not even accidental. They made it broken intentionally. So it's not broken. It's designed as intended to make you uncomfortable when you play it.
Okay. Yep. And Mike again is saying, so his question is, so gold EXP boosters can actually harm the game. I know I was speaking to him, he's interested in making like a CCG or that kind of design. He wants to make it so it's more ethical. He wants to avoid, again, a lot of these traps that he sees in most free-to-play design titles.
Well, any type of accelerant can cause players to go through your content faster. So you need to understand that the downside for the developer is that it costs money to make content. And if you know that you're going to run out of content too quickly before you can get new content, that's a problem. But if you know that you're releasing your game and it has 180 days of content, and you know you're going to be able to come out with an expansion within 180 days, you're cool. But then if you put an accelerant in and now your players are done with the content in 90 days instead of 180 days, are you going to have the next content for them in 90 days? If not, they could churn out waiting for that 180-day content hit.
And I think this actually goes back to what we talked about, I think, 2 casts ago, with regards to user-generated content, or letting the consumers create their own form of content, whether it's through communal aspects or even through competitive or PvP play, wherein once their players are competing with each other, they're basically doing it all themselves. And as long as there's, matchmaking or ranking systems, they can keep playing your game endlessly as long as they're still being challenged and there's still people that they can find and play against.
Well, that's kind of the holy grail, isn't it? If you can get your players to make the content for you, so you don't have to. Yeah, that's great, but it's not the easiest thing to do. But if you can pull it off, you deserve all the money that comes to you, really.
Exactly. And again, as you just said, it all comes back to the developer understanding just how much can they reasonably make within a period of time. I go back to the DC Universe Online example when they were promoting, we're going to create expansion level content every 30 days for our game. And then they realized after 60 days, how the hell are we going to keep doing this? We can't make this much content in this span of time. Let's see.
But increasingly, that's also why production is going to there's a lot of unemployed people in game development in the West because it's cheaper to hire people that aren't in the West to do all this stuff for you. Which is a whole other topic we'll probably get into some other time.
Exactly. Yep, and Mike is saying in chat that co-op and PvP being kind of the end game, because as we said, if your end game is only going to be defined by what content the developer puts out, it's never ending. You're going to basically design this game for 10 to 15 years, and people will still be saying, where's the next level? Where's the next bit of expansion? You're never going to hit that point where people will say, yeah, you can stop working on this game, essentially.
Ideally, if you want your game to be that long tail, and I'm aiming for that on the 2 products I'm developing right now, you can never keep the content treadmill going that long. But what you can do is you can create a social environment where people are making friends there, where they'll be missed if they don't log in for a day, and that you can keep going indefinitely. If you can keep the social environment going, you can keep people playing and paying indefinitely.
And correct me if I'm wrong, for the games that you're developing, are they going to be free-to-play or subscription-based?
Well, both.
Okay.
I'm a fan of free-to-play, and I'm a fan of subscriptions and micro-subscriptions, but the subscriptions you're going to see in these games are unlike any subscriptions you've ever seen before.
Okay. All right. So here's my final question for you for tonight, and then I'll throw over to you to wrap things up. So over the last hour and a half, we've talked about ethical design, we've talked about unethical design, how there are many, many, many examples of those games out there. So my question for you is, for these games that are on the unethical side, is there a way to turn things around and stay profitable, as in changing their whole monetization scheme, or is it a case that, once the ship has sailed, there's no going back, like you can't really right it?
The problem isn't necessarily that they can't repair it. Its problem is that when you've hired a crew to make a dark side product, they will resist any attempt to improve the product and make it a light side product. So really, in order to take a dark side product and make it a light side product, the first thing you have to do is clean house and get rid of all the dark siders, which basically means you have to start all over, because darksiders are survivors. They'll make sure that you fire all the lightsiders first before you fire them. So you basically have to get rid of everybody and then start over clean. And how are you going to hire lightsiders if your HR department has been trained to hire darksiders? You're not even going to know how to even approach this. So it's very difficult to switch a company that's been dark side for any period of time back to light side without basically starting over, and it probably just won't happen.
Okay.
It's a thing. That's why there's the threat of going dark side, because once you go dark side, you're never going back. You made your choice.
And I kind of lied because I thought of one other question that just popped into my head regarding having premium or real money transactions. And I think I kind of know your answer to this already, but I want to get it out there. Games that have auction house or in-game markets. Of course, big example would be EVE Online. I know World of Warcraft has kind of like a real money auction house. We mentioned that Diablo game earlier that also did it as well. But what are your thoughts on having a player or design a game to have a player-based economy or market like that? Is that considered ethical, or can it go both either way depending upon the design?
The first 5 years of my research were all focused at large world economies, the types where people are playing back and forth, are interdependent, they're trading resources, etc. We killed those games off when we went to microtransactions because we didn't know how to create those types of economies without them being taken apart by gold farmers. So those are, to me, masterful game environments, but we don't build them anymore.
And if
they
we
don't
were
exist.
If we were to talk about that kind of design, that's easily another hour or two, I think, on top of what we have.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, I'd be talking about why we want to build those types of games and why we aren't anymore.
Yep. And maybe we can say that for our next cast when we have free time in the future.
Sure.
All right, but I think that is all the questions. Oh, wait, let's see. Malwinius is asking, any thoughts on the new digital game by Valve? I think that's Artifact. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I saw it. I wishlisted it on Steam when I saw it, but I haven't seen it yet since it isn't out yet. But I will certainly check it out as soon as it comes out. So hold that thought, maybe.
All right. So
I will definitely check it out.
All right, so I've kind of had my final point, so I'm going to turn things over to you, Ramin, to, I guess, end our cast or our discussion for tonight. Any final thoughts or anything you want to end things on?
Yeah, I just want to point out that the reason why regulators in Europe are treating children differently than adults is because children are different than adults, and children are developing, and their nervous systems are developing, and children are. We know now, just from research in the last 5 years, that children are physically altered by exposure to stress, especially chronic stress, at early ages, what we call epigenetics. Epigenetic changes. Their DNA basically changes when they're exposed to high levels of stress. So what may seem like, for a developer, like something entertaining to try or experiment with, or maybe a way to make some quick money, could have long-term permanent repercussions on some of your younger consumers, and I would urge them, as strongly as they told me that compassion has no place in business. This is one area where I would urge them to feel at least somewhere deep down in their heart, somewhere there must be a little ember of compassion somewhere, and I would like to put a little breath on that and bring it up and go easy on the children, or at least try to make more ways to make it so your product is harder to access with children, because otherwise we're going to have to endure much stronger forms of regulation than we are now, and it's going to make our lives very difficult as developers.
All right, I think that is definitely a great point to end things on for tonight. So we just went, we almost hit the 2-hour mark for our cast, so that's good. And
My
again,
laptop is smoking.
yeah, we better get going. If you wouldn't mind hanging on Skype for like 1 minute after we end the call or end this. But yeah, this has been, as always, a great cast with Ramin, and like I said, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the 2 games that you're working on in the, I guess, has there been any move in terms of a release date, or I guess a soft release date for them?
2019 for Destiny Sword, and we have no hard date yet for Project Arcara. I think it's the first time I mentioned that. We don't have an official name for that game yet. But we're talking about dropping a large sum of money on that design and making it a big game. So when we do have that sorted out, probably 2020, it would be just my rough guess. You'll know that'll be a major game when it comes out. Right. Both of these will be major games. These are both multi-million-dollar projects using a lot of very advanced tech.
All right, and definitely best of luck with them. And like I say, with each one of these cats, it's always great hanging out with you. And this is the kind of stuff I love, just being able to sit here and talk design with people.
And it's always a pleasure to be on your show, because you let me talk about stuff that I'm not really allowed to talk about in a lot of more mainstream news channels.
All right, not a problem. But yet, in the coming weeks, if we get more time open, it'll be great to have you back on.
That would be my pleasure.
Awesome. So, for people watching us live or recorded right now, we are going to end things for our chat tonight. If you're watching this recorded and would like to get this cast earlier and ad-free, check out patreon.com/GWBlazer. That's my accelerant for the game wisdom right there. There we go. But as always, be sure to check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. You'll find links to my first book as well as to our Discord channel, all linked down below. But that is going to do it for tonight. So have a great, we're doing this on Cyber Monday. We're competing with both Cyber Monday and the NASA Mars.
The Mars landing.
Yeah, we're competing with everything right now. So we'll wrap things up. So have a great night, folks, and we will see you next time for another discussion on game design. But until then, take care.